don't know, I am Mara Jetman. I am the director of the Burlington Council on Aging, and I actually work quite closely with Congressman Seth Moulton's office. So I'm here to introduce him. Congressman Seth Moulton is a Democrat representing Massachusetts' 6th Congressional District. He's a Marine Corps veteran who served 4 infantry combat tours in Iraq. Seth currently sits on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, the House Armed Services Committee, where he is a ranking member on the Subcommittee on Strategic Forces, and the newly formed House Select Committee on Strategic Competition between the U.S. and the Chinese Communist Party. He was named the most effective freshman Democrat in his first term, and no House or Senate office has won more democracy awards from the Congressional Management Foundation than his team. Congressman Moulton has co-authored the bill to designate 988 as the National Suicide and Mental Health Lifeline with a veteran across the aisle. Since going live nationwide in July 2022, the hotline has saved a record number of lives. He is a national leader on mental health, national security, veterans, and high-speed rail. Congressman Moulton has earned degrees in physics, business, and public administration from Harvard, and he lives in Salem, Massachusetts with his wife and 2 daughters. And before he comes up, I want to apologize for the temperature in here. We are working on it, so hopefully we'll cool down lower in here. So, Congressman Moulton, take it away.
Thank you very much. And thanks for all that you do for this community. It means a lot. It's a pleasure to work with you and your team.
Thanks.
So let me just begin with a few remarks that I can get quickly to your questions. There are a lot of politicians who love to filibuster and just give speeches. I don't think I can do my job if I don't hear from you, because you're the people that my team and I work for every single day. And we believe that very strongly. So I love the fact that so many of you have come out on this really unpleasantly hot night. Would have been great to have this kind of weather a few weekends back in July or August, but we got rain on the weekends in the summer, and we get a lot of heat when everyone's going back to work and back to school. But you're here. You're here because democracy matters, because we have a system of government that relies on people to participate. And I can't be an effective representative for you and this entire community in Washington if I don't hear from you. And the other thing I want to say about that job being your representative, is that my job is to work for you regardless of whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or an independent or something else. Whether you voted for me or for someone else or you didn't vote at all. I work for you every single day, and I take that responsibility incredibly seriously. So you're helping me do my job better for you by showing up here this evening, and I appreciate that a lot, and I will do my best to answer as many questions as I can. Today was the first day of school for many people in this district, including my eldest daughter, who's checking in at 4 years old, so she's maybe a little bit younger than some of your kids. But she had a great first day of school, aside from getting stung by a yellow jacket, so overall, not the worst, I guess, but not the best either. A lot of parents, though, as they send their kids to school for the first time, don't just worry about whether they get stung by a bee, which, trust me, was not on my list of worries this morning. And they don't just worry about what kind of education they're going to get. They worry about whether their child will survive the experience of going to school. And I think it's pretty crazy that we live in the most successful country on earth, and yet we have to worry about whether our kids will get shot while they're going to school. Now, the leading cause of death for children in America. So as we start back into school, I want you to know that this is something I care about a lot. I care about it as your representative. I care about it as a lawmaker in Washington who's incredibly frustrated that I can't get more of my colleagues to join forces, to have a little bit of political courage and do the right thing when it comes to just keeping our kids safe. And I say it to you as a parent who walked his daughter into school for the first day this morning. I'm very proud to have been an original co-sponsor of the bipartisan gun legislation that was passed a couple years ago, the first time since 1994 that we've had any significant movement in Congress. but it's a small step in the right direction, a small step, not nearly enough. I'm also proud to be a part, actually on the board of an organization called 97%, which is trying to change the conversation around gun safety by bringing gun owners into the discussion. You know, it's remarkable when you look at the discussion, at the statistics, that the majority of Republicans, the majority of NRA members support common sense gun reforms like background checks that have been proven to save a lot of lives. Of course, when you look at Republican leaders or NRA leadership, the people who control the money, it's a different story. But we're trying to change that conversation. So I'm not interested in just banging my head against the wall and making political points. I want to make real change. And I know this is an issue that matters a lot to people in this room. I also want to talk a little bit about mental health, because this is a place where I've decided to take a little bit of leadership by sharing my own personal story of dealing with post-traumatic stress after coming back from Iraq. Now, this was a big political gamble when I told this story a few years ago. I didn't know if it might end my political career that night. But it didn't. Instead, I found the community, this whole community that I represent, was wonderfully receptive to the fact that I shared my story of dealing with a mental health challenge. The first serving member of Congress to do that, I think, in United States history. And I said, I'm not just going to talk about this, I'm going to do something about it. I released a 3-point plan, the first point of which was to pass a bill to establish a 3-digit nationwide mental health hotline so that anyone, no matter what cell phone or landline you have, anywhere in America, you can dial for help. And if you wake up in the middle of the night, just like if you wake up in the middle of the night and your house is on fire, you don't have to go find a phone book to look up the number for the fire department. You just know you dial 911. Well, now we want everyone in America to know that if you or a loved one wakes up in the middle of the night and you have a mental health crisis, you can dial 988. It's saving a lot of lives. Calls are up about 50% since the line went into service last year. But text, because you can also text 988. And obviously that's a good proxy for young people who are using text as opposed to getting phone calls like that, who are texting each other. How much do you think texts are up? Calls are up 50%. Any guess? 100%? 300%. 300%? About 1,100%. Which is an amazing measure of how many more young lives we're saving. Because an extraordinary number, some people estimate 90 to 95% of these calls or texts result in a life-saving intervention. So we're saving thousands of kids' lives, but of course it's also a sad measure of the need. And you know what? I was on the steps of the Capitol back in April when all the school groups come in and speaking to a group of students. And they asked, you know, what are you doing here? How have you actually made a difference? And I told them the story of 988. And I shared some of the same statistics that I just shared with you because I think they're pretty impressive. And this group of middle schoolers, you know, I think that they said, all right, yeah, we've heard of that. It's a good thing. But then after I took the photo with them, as we always do, a woman from another school group walked up to me and she said, you know, excuse me, sir, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I want you to know that your law saved my daughter's life. And then she introduced me to her 13-year-old daughter. That's why I keep doing this job, by the way. So many people ask me all the time, you know, gosh, with everything as bad as it is in Washington today, with all the hate and vitriol and divisiveness around politics, why do you keep doing this? Well, it's because of stories like that. Because we're trying to really make a difference in people's lives. Now, there are more mundane ways that we make a difference in people's lives, too. And I was very proud to be here in Burlington earlier today to celebrate one of those, which is inaugurating your new water filtration plant. And let me tell you, the townspeople of Burlington, and I'm sure there's some people that are not from Burlington here tonight too, but you should be very proud of what you accomplished. Because you can open up the paper any single day and read about massive infrastructure projects that are delayed, over budget, not getting done, or even corrupt. But this project was delivered on time, on budget, only 2 years after you identified the problem. Now everyone in Burlington has safe water to drink. So there are thousands and thousands of communities all across America that just in the last few years have realized they have a PFAS problem, these forever chemicals that have been great for, cooking fried eggs with your Teflon pan and not having much to do to clean it up, and now all of a sudden we realize that stuff can be dangerous, or wearing a Gore-Tex jacket when you go outside in the winter. But your community actually did something about it, and I was very proud to provide about $1 million to support that effort and help get that project done on time. So thank you for being a partner with me, but most of all, give yourselves a pat in the back for getting that done, and we just cut the ribbon for that today. The last thing I'll say is that, well, we usually talk about these big issues, and a lot of the questions I'm sure will be about these big issues that are bedeviling our community and our country right now. A lot of the work that we do every single day in my congressional office is just helping individual constituents. And since 2015, we've returned over $20 million just to constituents like you through missed Social Security payments, veterans benefits that veterans were owed and weren't getting compensated for, or all sorts of other things from the federal government. That's work that we're very proud of. It doesn't get much attention. It's below the radar. In fact, most of it's just covered by the Privacy Act. We can't even talk about individual stories to all of you. But you should know that a lot of people in our community, maybe some folks who are here tonight, have come to my office when they have a problem with the federal government. And we've rolled up our sleeves, made phone calls, gotten people in Washington to do their job, and ultimately returned hard-earned dollars to all of you. We're very proud of that work. I'm very proud of my team, some of whom are represented here tonight. And if you have a specific constituent issue where you think we can help, please don't hesitate to come up to me or to someone on my staff this evening. This is our job. We work for all of you. So thank you again for coming out. And the last thing, just a little bit about how this is going to work. So who's handling the microphones, Nisha? Okay, Claudia, okay. So some members of my team will be walking around with microphones. So if you want to ask a question, raise your hand or whatever, but make sure you get their attention, not mine, because I'm not the one calling on questions, and I'm just going to try to focus on answering them. So thanks again for being here tonight. Okay, let's dive in.
Is this on?
Yes, and if you would just introduce yourselves and say where you're from, that would be great.
My name is Kendra Bowser.
It is.
Kendra Bowser from Merrimack, and I'm a member of Citizens Climate Lobby.
Uh-huh.
And I'd like to thank thank you for the work you've done to support veterans and to make the development of high-speed rail a priority. My question is, I'd like to get your view on the status of clean energy permitting reform in Congress, which I think will be key to take advantage of the money available in the Inflation Reduction Act. And I'd also like to know your view on what clean energy permitting reforms you think are needed.
Sure, so a clean energy permitting reform, this sounds like a very technical question, but it's actually really important to me because of its impact specifically on high-speed rail. So before I came to Congress, I worked on a high-speed rail project in Texas. This is a project that is transformative economically. The project was specifically down there to connect Houston and Dallas, which is a 5 to 6 hour drive, depending on traffic, into a 60 to 90 minute train ride. And it's also basically a 3 hour trip on by plane if you count getting to the airport and everything else, and the flights are often canceled due to thunderstorms. So it would be transformative for this part of Texas, and by the way, also really good for the environment, because all electric trains, you just hook up to a carbon-free energy source, it's a totally carbon-free transportation system. And yet the biggest hindrance to getting this project done were the environmental procedures, passing through all the boxes you have to check with the National Environmental Protection Act. very well intentioned. So the point is, you have a project that's fundamentally really good for the environment getting held up by environmental regulation. So a lot of people on the left are sort of inflexively and reflexively opposed to any permitting reform. I think we've got to be smart about it. I think this is a place where Republicans have a point, that sometimes government regulation is just too much. Now, if you want to build a 12-lane highway, I want to have a lot of environmental reviews, because there are a lot of things about a 12-lane highway that are bad for our environment, bad for our community. But if you want to do a project that's fundamentally good for the environment, then we should expedite that review process. I think this is a place where Democrats and Republicans should come together. Republicans who want to eliminate all environmental regulation, Democrats who don't want to budge, and say, let's start by reforming the places where an expedited review process should make sense. Now, we tried to do a little bit of that in the bipartisan infrastructure law. It didn't get very far, but I can tell you that it's something that I hope will come to fruition. And I think the way you improve regulation overall is start by the places where Democrats and Republicans can agree. So thanks, and thanks for your work with the climate lobby. We can hear you.
Hi, my name is Lee Cadillac. I live here in Burlington, and I'm a town meeting member. I just have a question about privacy laws. So what are your thoughts on the U.S. instituting a privacy law like the GDPR or like what California has already implemented in order to protect consumer privacy?
Fully in favor. Fully in favor. I think this is a place where we have to have big tech regulation. And I was sitting in an international conference discussing this recently, and a bunch of Europeans said, well, look at the Americans. They don't want to do any of this. We're continually leading the way. And they're right, by the way. They're right that Europe is way ahead of us on this. And I think that's embarrassing. I mean, we have all the big tech companies. We should be the ones setting the rules of the road, not letting Europe set them, and then we have to kind of catch up ourselves. And meanwhile, Europe's citizens are much better protected, have better privacy protections than we do, than our kids do, right? But the point I made to this critic who said, look at the Americans, they're not doing anything, they don't agree with this, is that if you asked ordinary Americans, they would totally agree with this. There's widespread support for these privacy protections, right? You don't want all your data owned by the Googles and Apples of the world who are profiting off of your data. And by the way, do you see any return on that? No. They make a ton of money off of knowing exactly who you are, how old you are, what you like to look at on the internet, you know, who your relatives are, what sorts of things you buy. Like, they know all of that, and they make a lot of money off of it because they charge advertisers extra money to be able to target ads directly to you, and you don't see any of that. No benefit to you for giving up all of your personal preferences and data. So I think that this should change, and it's a place where the American people are way ahead of the American lawmakers and regulators. So there are a lot of my colleagues who are opposed to this. Can anyone take a wild guess? Because they get a lot of money from the Googles and Apples of the world. And the lobbyists in DC say we don't want these regulations. But I think that's wrong. So the answer to your question is I support it. Well, I mean, so the point is, so there was a great Washington Post article, if you want to read it, about how a big effort to get regulation on big tech, led by, it was focused on the Senate, but a bipartisan group in the Senate, essentially withered and died. Some people in the House too, including Ken Buck, who's a very conservative Republican from out west, from Colorado, not the person that you would expect to support big tech regulation. But once he understood the issue, like you seem to, and like I do, he said, absolutely, we should do this. And he got, a lot of political fire for that. So look, I'm not afraid to stand in front of a town hall and say that I support this. A lot of my colleagues are. And I think we need to have more pressure from citizens like you, asking people like me at town halls to get out there and actually support this stuff, because it matters to the American consumer. You're welcome. Good evening. Hi.
Been waiting
I'm speaking.
Can you hear me clear enough?
Yes, but you're not asking the question, sir. The woman behind you is. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. It's okay.
I guess I have to be problem with both the state and the federal government. I don't see anybody in Washington talking about closing up borders. As far as I'm concerned, the borders are wide open. Nobody is saying anything. And I just found out that the town of Burlington has been embraced with the number of illegal aliens that are now being housed in Burlington. We just passed our budget. That means there's going to be more kids in the school. It's going to knock the hell out of the budget. And the school committee will be in September looking for more money because they're going to need ESL teachers and more. So, I mean, it's killing us. I see nobody talking about closing the borders. I see nobody talking, screaming in Washington about telling all these people on the various states. Nobody's doing anything. People are very upset about it. Washington is doing nothing.
So. You have a lot of support for your question, so I'm happily willing to answer it. First of all, I think you're absolutely right that Washington is doing nothing. I totally agree with you there. You're totally wrong that people aren't talking about it. In fact, the problem is that everyone is making political hay out of this issue rather than actually coming up with real solutions. People love to talk about this issue. People love to hammer the fact that there is an increase in migrants coming over the border. They love to hammer this. They love on the left to talk about how, we're crucifying these immigrants, we're not handling them humanely, we're separating families. In fact, the problem with this issue is that it's a political talking point where people won't sit down and actually hammer out a solution. And I personally don't think a solution is actually that hard. I think the basic outlines of what we need, which is real immigration reform in America, is pretty simple. We need to strengthen our borders. I agree with you on that. We also need to provide a pathway to citizenship for people who are here and people who want to come here legally. We have a massive employment problem right now. You go down to the Cape this summer and a lot of restaurants are closed half the week because they don't have people to work. So how is it that you have a lot of people in Burlington, people who endured an arduous 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 mile trip, often on foot, to get here? That's not an easy thing to do. I mean, these people are not coming up here on vacation. They're coming up here because they feared for their lives. Ma'am, can I answer the question, please? Ma'am, can I ask the question, please? We're going to try to have a respectful conversation here. But if you don't think that people can go there all by themselves, maybe you can't, but you should meet some of these people. And here's my point. They feared for their lives. They walked 2,000 miles. They're hardworking people. And you can go around and see what these immigrants do when they get to work. They're a hell of a lot more hardworking than a lot of Americans. And here's the irony, is that we don't put them to work. They're willing to work and pay taxes, but they don't pay taxes because they don't have a legal pathway to citizenship. We can't hire enough people to work our lawns, to wash dishes, to do all these jobs that keep restaurants closed when they could be making money because we don't have enough people because unemployment's so low. And some of the hardest working people here have proven it by doing this long journey, we can't put to work. That's why immigration reform helps our deficit. It reduces our deficit because it gets these people who want to work on our tax rolls paying taxes like all the rest of us. So the basic outlines of the political compromise necessary for immigration reform aren't that hard. And there are a lot of people who have shown the political courage to put this forward. To cite a Republican president, George W. Bush, 15 years ago, he laid out a plan for immigration reform. It was killed by Republicans in the House. Why? Because they see a lot of political value in talking about this issue, in complaining about it, in getting on Fox News or News Nation or whatever you want to call it, and making political hay of this issue rather than actually doing something to fix it. So, look, we may not agree on exactly what the solution is, but I think the outlines are pretty clear here, and most Americans agree with what I just said. The difference is I'm actually someone who's willing to support that, to vote for it, to work on that kind of compromise rather than just complain about it.
Rich Churkart, Burlington.
Hey Rich, how are you?
Good. Thank you for your service, by the way.
Thank you.
Fellow vet.
Thank you for yours.
What are we doing about Social Security reform?
Rich, it's a great question because Social Security is a great program that's been around for almost 100 years, and it's kept a lot of people out of poverty, supported a lot of people. My parents rely on Social Security right now, and yet it's not going to be there for me. It's not going to be there for my kids. When I retire, if we continue without reform, which is what your question is about, the program won't exist. And again, this is a place where the compromise isn't that hard to see. I'm actually one of the co-sponsors of a bill that will fix Social Security. John Larson down in Connecticut wrote this bill. He and I came up and talked about it at a senior center in Danvers a few years ago. Now, why can't we get that done? Well, because it requires a very small, and I can't emphasize how small this is, like fractions of a cent or a few cents on the dollar, increase in the amount of money that people like me have to pay into Social Security. And you know what? I'm willing to do that if it's there for me. Right now, I'm paying a whole bunch of money into Social Security to fund your retirement, not to fund mine, and that's not the way the system is supposed to work. It also requires a discussion about the retirement age. Now, I don't want them to go and all of a sudden, yank away my parents' Social Security benefits because they say, oh, well, we shouldn't have let you retire as early as you did. I don't think that that's fair to existing retirees, to people who are counting on this to be there. But if you talk to me or members of my generation, I think it's pretty fair to say, yeah, when this program was designed, life expectancy was here, now it's here. A lot of people are working a little longer. We should be able to make a compromise and pay a little bit more into the system so it's there. So again, Rich, this is a frustrating answer, but it's a place where the solution isn't that complicated, but the politics, it's just so easy to vote against it. If someone decides to run against me this fall, they'll say, oh, I remember when Moulton was there at that town hall in Burlington, and he says he wants to raise the retirement age, or he says he wants to, pay more into Social Security. And they're going to leave out the fact that I'm talking about me, myself. They're leave out the fact that Social Security isn't even going to be there for me if we don't make these reforms. But that's the kind of thing that we need to do. So I'm glad you brought that up. You get that thing working? Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can.
Kim McLaughlin, I'm from Burlington.
I can.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
And thank you for your transparency around your trauma and your recovery. I agree with you. I think everyone loves to talk about immigration issues, people who support newly arriving citizens, and people who want to go to law to remove them. What concerns me is we seem as a state to be choosing who we are providing emergency housing for, and we're forgetting about a lot of others who are in need of emergency shelter because of an intense focus on housing newly arrived citizens. And so how will that be addressed? We have a state of emergency.
Yeah.
And yet we have, a mile from where I work is Mass and Cass. And no one wants to, that's not exciting to talk about, and people do not have any interest in that, but daily there are 400 humans living on that street.
Yeah.
And there are also, and I don't need to tell you this, many veterans
Yeah.
that are unhoused. And we have a right to, I'll finish with this, we have a right to shelter law in Massachusetts, but that covers families. That does not cover individuals, which excludes those two populations that I just mentioned.
That's a very thoughtful question. You clearly understand this issue pretty well. And you're right. I saw a homeless person, my wife and kids and I were going out to dinner the other night earlier this week, and 2 houses down, drove by a homeless person sitting on the lawn, and it was pretty obvious this was, an old white man right? This was not a recently arrived migrant from South America. This is someone who might have had a bed in the shelter a year ago and maybe doesn't now because of exactly what you've described. So this is a very real experience. This is absolutely happening, and I think it's a very thoughtful question. So thank you for bringing it up. And unfortunately, despite how thoughtful a question this is, there's not an easy answer, because right now all our shelters are simply over capacity, and we just don't have the capacity, and that's why you have people put up in hotels and whatnot. I don't think that's a great solution, but the shelters, we just do not have the shelter capacity to handle these folks. And because a lot of these, especially the young families often have parents who really want to work, but they can't get work permits to go out and do so. They're worried that if they work illegally, they'll get disbarred from ever getting a work permit in the future, and so they don't want to work for that reason until they can get a work permit. And as a result, the shelters are being taken up by these families who probably could afford a house if they could just get a job, but can't get jobs, and so they take the shelter space from other people in our community, including veterans who need it. Now, specifically with Mass and Cass, since I obviously don't, represent that part of the state, and so I'm not intimately familiar with the issue, but I will say I support the much more aggressive approach that Mayor Wu has taken recently, and she's received some real criticism on the left for trying to do something to clear it out. I don't know the details of how it's going or whether it will work, but I think that she's someone who's shown a little political courage in trying to actually take this on and not just pretend it doesn't exist. And like you say, it's an easy issue not to talk about, but we do need to address this. And look, we have in Bedford, there's a lot of veterans who are housed there, and it's tough. I mean, on the one hand, it's fantastic that Bedford has taken this on, and there are a lot of veterans who have a roof over their heads who otherwise wouldn't. If they lived in other parts of the country, down in Texas or Florida, they wouldn't have a facility like Bedford. But that facility hasn't been without its challenges either. And a few years ago, there was a big problem when someone died there. A very tragic death, was not getting the assistance that clearly he needed. And, my office jumped in very aggressively to try to get to the bottom of what happened in that issue. So I don't have a great answer to your question, but I want you to know it's something that we're struggling with a lot. I mean, my wife asked when we were driving by, what do we do about this? And I said, look, the fundamental issue is immigration reform to get down to the basic origins of this crisis, why so many people are coming here illegally when actually we have a need for immigrants to continue coming legally. But in terms of what the state should do in this immediate crisis, it's really tough. Do we have anyone on this side? Okay, all right, we'll come back over here.
Hi, my name's Tom. Just a comment on the immigration. And then I have a question on something else. Yeah, sorry. One of the concerns I have about is border protection and people that are coming through and aren't being checked. So from my standpoint, one illegal citizen that comes in and does harm to an American citizen is one too many. And we're letting people come through the border through illegal, so something's got to change. And as far as I'm concerned, this current administration has done very little. They're kind of waved away. It required Republican states, Texas and Florida, to start sending immigrants to more blue states that have some intention to start being paid for this. And the money that's being put out. So Chicago's complaining now. New York City's complaining now. Massachusetts is being hit $45 million a week, I think, a month. So part of this is, it's something has to be done better and sooner down there. And that doesn't, to me, take political action. That takes, well, maybe it does. It takes some redirection to the border control in what we're doing and allowing it. So that's kind of my statement. You can respond to that.
Look, I mean, I'll just respond very quickly. The reality is that the administration is, I think, trying to do what they can. Their hands are tied because the laws are what the laws are. I mean, that's why I mean, we have this three-part system of government, and if we want to change the laws, Congress has to pass these legal reforms. I was just looking for the statistic. 91,000 migrants were arrested at the southern border in August. By this administration, that's a record. So I don't think we can arrest our way out of this problem, but they've literally arrested more than ever in history.
The pushback, if I recall, back in the early days of the administration, that was not occurring. Okay, it's recent from my end. And I basically, watching the news, I don't watch Fox and CNN anymore. I watch
Yeah.
I just watch local news. I can't stand listening.
That's probably a good approach. I mean, look, but if your point is, I mean, look, if your complaint is that the administration should have been doing 2 years ago what they're doing now, like I'll take that complaint. I mean, they're trying to improve the situation. But let's get to your other question.
My other question is that I'm just curious if you have a position or an opinion on reparations.
So the question is whether I have a position or a opinion on reparations. I mean, I think when you talk about reparations, you're talking about like slavery or things like this.
I'm talking the giving of money back to people that who are in need of reparations should be encouraged. So if that's slavery, if that's people of color, if that's other people, I don't know how it's going to fall.
Well, let me give you an example of something I do support. And in fact, I've written a bill on this, and I wouldn't call this reparations. Some people might. But I am the author of the GI Bill Restoration Act. Now, what the GI Bill Restoration Act does is, are you a veteran, sir? No. Okay. So I'm a veteran and a beneficiary of the GI Bill. I would not have been able to go to grad school. I had already gone to college, but I wouldn't have been able to go to grad school without the GI Bill. A lot of my friends who showed up there, we all came on the GI Bill too. What I never knew until after I got out of that and used, the program to go to school, is that after World War II, even though this GI Bill was a race-neutral piece of legislation, a lot of black veterans were denied benefits. And so the GI Bill Restoration Act that I have authored, and Jim Clyburn of South Carolina is my lead co-sponsor on this, would restore those benefits to black veterans who were denied. Now, some people might call that reparations because we're giving it, our generation here, I wasn't around when they were denied the benefits, but we're saying you deserve this money that you earned by fighting in World War II, right?
I'm going to agree with you because I've read about it, and that makes no sense what transpired to anyone who was a veteran, but I understand
Yeah.
it did occur, and thank you for doing that.
That's the kind of thing that I support. But yeah, thanks. Okay, who's next? All right.
Okay, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
My father said if a guy's a Marine, that's all I need to know about him. He was a CB. That's where my pleasantry stopped.
Oh, sorry, people in the back can't hear you. I think it's on, so you just put up, there you go.
Okay.
Yep.
I want to say that again because it's important. My father said that if he's a Marine, that's all I need to know about him. He was a CB, and I appreciate your service. I think that's where my pleasantry stopped. Don't say Washington's not doing anything about immigration. I agree with that back here. And that gentleman in the green shirt right there, illegal immigration is one of the biggest problems that we have in this country because of all the added expenses that are going to go to all of us to support the schools, the hospitals, all the stuff, the anchor babies. I know people don't like to use that term, okay, but your country's no different than in your house. And when your front door's open and you can't control who's coming in there, you get problems. I personally know people who their children have died because of fentanyl overdoses. We got the best military in the world and we can't close the border. Don't say Washington's not doing anything about it because they are. They're making the problem worse. You got a president in there that can use an executive order and go in there and just sign that and stop the wall that all the people want to have done. And the Border Patrol has been asking for it. And he goes in and just stops it. And you've got, by the end of his administration, 10 million people coming in that you know of. You don't know who they are. You don't know how many terrorists are. You don't know how many people are coming up from MS-13 or any of those groups to set up drugs shops all around this place.
So what's your question?
Well, what I'm saying is, what are you doing to look out for us? Because Washington's not doing it, and I don't believe you are. I call your office, I get a runaround from your people that are there, they tell me when I say, how come you don't say anything about the planes that are coming into White Plains, New York, Philly, the illegals at 4 o'clock in the morning? What they said to me is, well, that hasn't been proven.
Okay. Well, look, I don't represent White Plains, but I'm happy to take on this question again.
You
That's my
represent the issue.
Okay. All right.
To me, you're my representative of this issue.
Look, I'm happy to address the question. First of all, I don't know if you've been down to the southern border recently. I went
down there. I'm too busy keeping my head above water up here trying to support my family.
Okay. Well, I went down there because I think that's part of my job.
I know you did, and I'm glad you did.
And you know, you learn a lot when you see this firsthand, and you talk to border control agents and whatnot. Spent some time with some veterans as well down there. Happy to tell that story too. But I'll tell you, the border officials that I talk to, like the real veterans who've been there, they actually don't think the wall is a good idea, because you build a 10-foot wall, I'll give you an 11-foot ladder, you're going to get over it.
So
What they want to do is actually target the places where a lot of migrants are coming through, and a lot of the fentanyl is coming through, and that's like our border crossings
Why
and
are you
whatnot.
putting a missile right in the houses or right in the compounds of those people in Mexico that are supplying the drugs to this country?
Well, actually, so look. Okay, well, all right, look, we want to have ladies and gentlemen, we want to have,
Trump wants to do it, and he tried to do the border.
all right, ladies and
I
gentlemen,
know if I bring up Trump's name, half of you people, your heads are going to fall off.
sir, everyone else has asked a question and allowed me to answer it.
Yes, go
I
right
would
ahead.
really appreciate being able to actually just answer
You said
that.
something, so I just wanted
Okay,
to respond to her. And they're not citizens.
Okay.
People
If you-
coming to the country aren't migrant citizens.
Sir, I'm going to try to listen,
I agree
sir.
with everything you said, but
Pointing your finger in my face, don't do that.
okay, they're not citizens.
Sir, I'm going to try to answer this question one last
I
time.
don't say anything else.
But look,
I did pretty good to be in this town.
okay. If you interrupt again, we're just going to go on to a different question, because if you interrupt again, you're just going to go on to a different question, because it's not fair to everybody else in the room.
Okay.
Okay? If you talk to the border control, they don't want to just build a wall. So when everyone is politically forcing Republicans or whoever else to pour a lot of money into the border wall, it's not actually solving the problem. And what I think we need to do is be smart about this. I told you from the very beginning that I think we need to improve our border security. You're not going to hear a lot of Democrats say that. I believe that that's part of immigration reform. But I also believe that you have to have a way to deal with the people who want to come here legally, who are good for our economy. That's just basic facts. Immigration is good for our economy. Immigration reform, the way I described it, reduces the deficit. So you're right that in the short term, when we're dealing with migrants coming to Burlington and trying to figure out how to house them, yes, that is a tax. That's an impact on all of us, because obviously that money's got to come from somewhere, and it comes from you, the taxpayer, me, the taxpayer, to fund that. But if you do this reform, it reduces the tax burden. You have to pay less for this because it reduces the overall deficit. And again, these are widely accepted facts. So too often, we just talk about, hey, why didn't we build the wall or whatever, without trying to understand the issue and what will really work. And that's why I think we've got to be smart about coming together and having a real solution that addresses the concerns of everyone in the room. The people on the right here are very loud, but there are a lot of people who care about the other side of this issue too. And I see those on Okay, next question.
Yeah. Congressman, thank you very much for your service, both in the military as well as in Congress.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate it very much. I am an immigrant, and this is my home. I am American. Most Americans are descendants of refugees. No one is a refugee by choice. They are a refugee by circumstance, and we need to recognize that. My question, however, is related to what's been happening overseas. 249 churches destroyed in 36 hours, 100 Christians killed, 300 total churches destroyed. And yet we continue to coddle the Hitler of today, Narendra Modi. We give him joint sessions in Congress, and we do not speak strongly because he does not say a word use your position on the China Committee to tell your colleagues, maybe through a dear colleague letter, that ordering Modi is the wrong thing to do?
Thank you very much for both your question and your point. I mean, look, I have a great, I don't think we have the most exhaustive family history in my family, but as far as we can tell, my distant relatives came over here on my father's side in about 1635, and my mother's side was much later. They didn't get here till 1637. But guess what? They were refugees. That's right. They weren't living the good life in England, and that's why they came over. They were refugees. And we do often forget that. This is a very thoughtful question about Modi. And look, it's also interesting that you brought up my position on the China Committee, because for people in the room who don't understand, it's a very interesting international situation where on the one hand, we want India to be a stronger ally because we want them to stand up to China. We don't want them to be buying all these arms from Russia as they have in the past. And so we're trying to win them over as a friend. And that was the basic impetus behind inviting Prime Minister Modi to come and speak before a joint session of Congress and have meetings with the administration. But you asked if I'd be willing to send a letter to my colleagues. I've done one better than you. I've sent a letter to the President of the United States before that visit saying, Mr. Biden, I understand why you're doing this. I want India as an ally, but you have to you have to be willing to discuss, and you have to be willing to hold them accountable for these human rights violations that are unquestionably occurring in India today. So there is a little bit of walking that line here. That, just to be fully candid, is something that I think many of us in Washington on both sides of the aisle are trying to do. But I was a member of a relatively small group of lawmakers who signed that letter to the president because of exactly your concerns.
Okay. The last question, please.
My name is Barbara Rue. I'm a lifelong resident of Burlington, and I'm the proud granddaughter of Italian immigrants who were not welcome when they first came here. But my question is not about immigration. You recently joined several Democrats in voting in favor of an amendment to military legislation. The amendment limits how race is discussed in K-12 schools for military families. It provides that money cannot be spent on programs that promote critical race theory. Given that there's no evidence that CRT is being taught in K-12 schools, my concern is that this amendment does not address any actual problem in our educational system, but rather just inflames the culture war in our country and lends credence to the false narrative that our education system is poisoning the minds of our American youth. Can you please explain to me what your thinking was and why you thought this amendment was worthy of your support? Because I would really like to understand where you were coming from.
Sure, I'd be happy to. May I just, before you get the microphone back, Claudia, what in the amendment did you disagree with?
What part of the amendment?
Yes.
I think I agreed with the fact that I felt it was unnecessary, and I thought it was.
I'm asking, is there any line in the amendment that you disagreed with?
No, I disagreed with the fact
Okay.
that it was not
All
necessary.
right. I just want to make that clear because
I
want to make that clear because that's the crux of the issue, right? I totally agree with you that all these, politicized DEI, et cetera, amendments were unnecessary in the defense bill. In fact, if you look at both the committee markup of the bill, where I sit, and you look at the debate of this bill before the entire House, I was very outspoken about exactly this point, that we shouldn't be voting on this stuff, that simply bringing up these issues as part of the defense bill is politicizing the military, and it's not necessary. So I totally agree with you on that. But here's the problem. When you're in my position, you don't get to vote not necessary. You vote yes or no. You either agree with it or you don't. And if you actually take the time to read the text of this amendment, which says, I don't believe that America is a fundamentally racist country. I don't believe that people are inherently racist. Like, I don't think that my daughter, who's 4 years old, is racist just because she's white. I agree with that. And so when push came to shove, there was a lot of people who said politically, oh, it sends the wrong message or whatever. But look, my job is to vote on the substance of bills, to actually read the legislation and say, as much as I wish we weren't voting on this at all, and I made a very public plea to get these amendments out of the defense bill altogether, my job is to vote yes or no on whether I agree with it. And like you, I agreed with the text of the amendment, even though I wish we didn't have to vote for it. So that's the answer. Thank you. All right, so apparently we are out of time. And I apologize for that. We got a lot of questions in. There was a lot of back and forth. We had a few interruptions, but overall, I really appreciate the fact that we were able to have a good dialogue here tonight. And I want to just end by thanking you again for coming out, for being willing to participate in our democracy. I mentioned this earlier, but the most frequent question I get, mostly from my friends, like people who really care about me, is, Seth, respect your service and all that, but my gosh, this is a brutal time to be in Washington. Why do you keep doing this? And I do it because I think that when your democracy is under threat, when things are really divided, when Washington isn't working well, that's when you need to pitch in to help. And I do fundamentally believe, I'm not saying this just to make you feel good on this super hot night in a very hot room, but I do believe it matters for people like you to have that same attitude and be willing to participate in the democracy that we have. It's fragile. It's not perfect. America has never been a perfect country. But we've always been a country that believes we might get there. And that hope that sustains us and fundamentally binds us together in these very contentious times, that doesn't work without all of you. So thank you very much for coming out tonight. It's my honor to represent you, to work for you, and please don't hesitate to let us know how we can help.